In this video, I'm going to show you where I believe Noah's Ark is located on Google Earth. In the picture you see before you is a picture of a boat, a shipwreck in Alaska on the left, and what I believe to be Noah's Ark up high in the mountains in Turkey on the right. I put the two side by side so you can see for comparison that they both have ship-like appearances, but the difference is the one in Turkey is high up in the mountains. And now I'll show you where I believe that is located to be. Here's a map of modern-day Turkey with Syria and Iraq to the south, and in the lower corner here we see Iran. So if we zoom in on the area right where Turkey and Syria and Iraq all meet, we'll see there's a city there by the name of Sirnak, or Sirnak. And that literally translates to the city of Noah. Sir being city and Nach being a derivation of the name Noah. So it's historically believed in that region that that is the area where Noah's Ark landed. And additionally, even today in the Islamic culture, they consider this region around a mountain there called Mount Judy as the mountain where the Ark landed. And literally that means that Mount Kuti Dag is another name for it, but it's known as the Mount of the Descent, or the mountain where they descended, the people who came off the Ark, where they descended out of the mountains. So just to kind of let you know what the makeup of the land is, to the south here we have desert and plain country, but as we move north we begin to get into the mountainous region of what in ancient times was called Urartu. And the Bible says that the Ark landed in the mountains, plural, of Urartu, or Ararat. It doesn't necessarily mean Mount Ararat itself, which is the tallest mountain in the region, but it says that the Ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, which could be any mountain in this area. So if we focus in on Sirnak, and we're going to zoom in a little bit more here, as we continue to zoom in, you see the city of Sirnak, or the city of Noah, to the north here. And just to the south a little ways, you have Kuti Dag, or Mount Judy, which is historically, the tradition is in the area and in the Islamic culture and in their Quran, that Kuti Dag is the place where they descended out of the mountains, or where Noah's Ark landed. There's also an ancient monastery that was built in this on this mountain ridge, known as the Monastery of Noah, to commemorate the fact that this is where Noah's Ark landed. So if we zoom in a little bit further here, what we'll see as we zoom in on Kuti Dag is there's an interesting structure, and it's clearly man-made. And if you zoom in really close, it appears to be made up of trees or bushes of some sort, but it's clearly a man-made structure on the side of this mountain. And there's no immediately large cities nearby. Even the case of the city of Noah, Sirnak, as you can see, that's quite a ways over the mountain ridges before you come to the city of Sirnak, Noah. So there's no really major cities. There's a city, Caesar, which is over here, and then there's also Salope. But as far as this particular region here, this structure kind of remains unknown, but it's made up of plants, and it may be very ancient. So this region is known for, as far as agriculture, for things like olive trees, pomegranate trees, and vines, grape trees. And some of these trees, like in the case of olive trees, they can last literally thousands of years. Now, if you watch my video on Bible chronology, you'll know that I believe that the flood occurred in the year 2312 BC, according to my chronology. Excuse me. So that's about around 4,300 years ago. So it's possible you could have olive trees that would only be on their second or third generation. It's also grape trees and pomegranate trees can live several hundred years possibly. There's some that have been lived as long as 400 years. So if there is any kind of a vineyard, and grape vineyards are typically done on the slopes of the sides of mountains in this region, if there is any kind of vineyard that's kept up over time, it's possible that after several generations of the same vineyard, it could kind of be an ancient vineyard that's been upkept over a long period of time and kind of kept its original shape. So the Bible says that when Noah and his descendants came out of the mountain, he planted a vineyard, and then he was drunk in his tent. And there's a story about the curse of Canaan in the Bible, when Noah became drunk in his tent after planting a vineyard. So if this is some type of a vineyard, what I find is kind of interesting about this is why this weird shape to it. So one possibility is, if this was the remains of Noah's vineyard, so to speak, this section here, where the vineyard cordons off this large empty area, this could be the location where the animals were kept, with a door right here, okay? And then this section here would be the actual vineyard where all the grapes and the crops were grown. And then you have 4 sections here, and there's 4 families that came off the ark. There's Noah and his wife, and then his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. So each section or each quadrant here could be a location for the living quarters or tents for all 4 of those couples. So that's kind of an interesting thought here. When I go on Google Earth, here's an interesting thing too. When I go on Google Earth and I plot out the lines for this structure so that it follows the same, the cross structure that's made in the middle of this structure, if I extend these lines indefinitely in different directions, what I find is that I can divide up the entire Earth into quadrants based on these 4 possible living quarters. So if Noah lived in the northern quarter, let's say, for example, and Japheth lived in the western quarter, and Shem lived in the eastern quarter, and Ham lived in the southern quarter, if I extend that out all the way across the planet, okay, so I'm going to show you where these red lines go, what we find is it matches the distribution of humanity on the planet. Because there's basically, because of the waters surrounding this area, there's basically 4 ways out of this region. You can go this way through Turkey into Europe. You can also go north into Russia and end up in Europe or Asia. You can go this way into Iran and end up in Asia. Or you can head south into Saudi Arabia and then into Egypt and down into Africa this way. So each of these quadrants, if they represent the living quarters of each of those family members, look how this plays out. If Ham lived in the south, his descendants end up in Africa, which is where the Bible says that their descendants ended up. Then Japheth, who is the father of the Europeans, his descendants go this way into Europe and end up into Europe. Whereas Shem, if he's the father of the Asiatics or Asian races, goes this way, ends up in India, China, etc. And then Noah to the north, the Bible says that God will enlarge the tents of Japheth, and Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. So this also could be the line of Japheth. Plus, if Japheth is the older, Japheth would be the inheritor of the first in line to the throne under Noah. So he would get the largest inheritance. Also, if we look over here and we extend it all the way around, we notice that most of North America would be under the portion of Noah, and that ends up being where Japheth ends up inhabiting. However, before Japheth was there, it was the descendants of Shem, the Native Americans, that occupied this land before the Europeans came over and took it over. So Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem. Meanwhile, Japheth, again, you have Africa. They have a little bit of Western Africa here, but this is the portion of Africa where the slaves of Japheth essentially were taken up from during the slave trade. And then you also have Latin America. These would also come from European, from the Spanish speaking countries, which are descendants of Japheth. Meanwhile, if we go over to the descendants of Shem, you have the Asiatic countries, China and Japan and so forth. And again, Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem in Australia. And then in the north, again, you have Siberia, but those would again be the descendants of Japheth, which would be the area where essentially Noah in his quadrant would have lived. So the outline of this matches the exit points from the Middle East to the various regions on the planet, And each quadrant, if those are the residents of each of the members of the household, they also match the distribution of their families across the planet, the Japhetic races, the Hamitic races, and the Semitic races. So I find that very, very interesting. Now, if we zoom in further here, what we'll notice, and I'm going to show you where Noah's Ark is, in my opinion. Okay, so this is called the place of the descent. Now, if they descended out of the mountains, most likely, they're, and I'll kind of show you an angle here so you can see what the mountains look like. So you have before you this mountainous region. So here is the possible location of Noah's Vineyard on the slope of this mountain. And then as we scroll around, you look to the south here, and you see the plains of Iraq laid out before you. But from the north, here's the mountains that they came out of. So that's why this is called the Mountain of Descent. It's where they descended out of the ark. Now, if you're going to descend out of the ark, you're most likely going to walk along the river valley. That's how you're going to, you're not going to go along the cliffs and the sides of the mountains. If you're going to walk out of the mountains, you're going to take the path of least resistance. You're going to walk along the river valley. So from here, if this is the place of the descent from the ark, if we just walk along the river valley and follow it, we should be able to find the location where the ark is located. So let me get a little bit more of an overhead here. So, as we can see, if we just keep following this river valley here, I'm just going to keep following it up with my mouse cursor, and we keep going all the way up, okay? Eventually, we're going to come to this slope here, all right? And this, I'll kind of show you this slope here. This is kind of, it's a very tall slope, this peak here, but here's the river valley. It leads all the way up to the top of this slope. And this slope here, it's a very tall slope. It's not the tallest in the region, but it's a tall slope. But it's where the river valley leads to from Mount Judy. And if we turn this slope around and we look on the back side of the slope, we see the ark, this object here, okay, that I showed in the beginning. So what's interesting about this, now you notice the difference in the shape and the color of the ark and so forth compared to the surrounding vegetation. When you zoom out, you can still see it, but there's nothing else like it. There's no other natural formations that look like this when you zoom out. It's very apparent that this is different from the surrounding countryside, okay? So now, let's do a basic test to see if this could possibly be the ark, all right? One of the ways we can test to see if this is the ark is given a certain dimensions for width and height and size and so forth in the Bible. It's 300 cubits long, so that translates to, a cubit is about 18 inches, so it translates to about 450 feet. According to the Bible, the ark is 50 cubits wide, which is about 75 feet, and about 30 cubits tall, which is about 45 feet. We can't do the height of the ark because this structure here seems to be mostly buried into the side of the hill at this point. But we can do the length and we can do the width. So let's take a look at the length and the width using the measurement program on Google Earth. Now this might not be totally exact because the picture is a little bit distorted on the fact that it's the side of a hill, but we'll try to see if we can come close to what the measurements are. So what we see here, using the measurement tool, you'll notice that the ground length of this object is 450 feet in length, which is the dimensions of Noah's Ark. It fits it almost perfectly, okay? Now let's do the width. So this yellow line represents roughly 75 feet in the ground length of the object here, and that is the dimensions of Noah's Ark. So what are the odds that at Mount Judy, the place traditionally historically called the place of the descent, if you follow the route that they probably would have taken for descending out of the mountains, the river valley, you follow that route all the way up to the top of the mountain, you find a boat-like object that looks like a boat compared to other pictures of boats on Google Earth, and it has the dimensions given in the Bible for Noah's Ark. To me, it would suggest that this is the most likely candidate for Noah's Ark. And there are, I don't know if this is going a little bit too far, but there are what appears to be 8 trees inside the window section in the top here, possibly as an analogy of Noah's family, because there were 8 members aboard the ark. So I don't know if that's accurate, but it's a possibility. So now what we'll do, there's one more thing I want to show you here. If we scroll out a little bit, and we're going to take a look at this peak, that it looks like the ark slid downward on the side of this peak, okay? But if we look overhead on the top of the peak here, and again, this is a little bit distorted because Google Earth does distort it, you'll notice that there seems to be some discoloration here that looks somewhat similar to the ark itself. It seems to have the window section here, and then it seems to have the boat-like section here, and it appears, if you can see some lines here, that it's possible that the ark at one point was on the top of this peak and then slid downward to its present location. And so it's possible that there's evidence that the ark was moved over time, that it slid down to where it is now on the side of the hill. So here's a side-by-side example of the same picture, and here you can see the outline of where I think the ark was resting originally before it slid down the hill to its present location. Here's that same picture without the markings on it, so you can see for comparison. But it would appear that this, in my opinion, is the most likely candidate for Noah's Ark. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, please leave comments below, or anything you want to say about it, and also please like and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in future videos and showing you more Bible stuff that I find as I go along here. So thanks very much, and I appreciate your time.